Welcome to the Spirit-Led Podcast, your guide on a journey to full enlightenment in this beautiful life. I'm your host, Joan Hope Craig. Each episode we explore spiritual wisdom, life's purpose, and the profound impact of daily choices on our personal growth and the world. Well, hello, Ray Booker. Nice to have you.
Yes, hello, Joan. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, let me introduce you to the audience. Ray Booker is a certified Ayurvedic practitioner and graduate of the ASP1 and ASP2 programs at the Ayurvedic Institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He holds certificates in Ayurvedic yoga therapy and food as medicine. And he has studied Sanskrit with Vyaas Houston of the American Sanskrit Institute, Nicolai Bachman and Pierre, Couvillion, who both taught at the Ayurvedic Institute. Ray first began practicing and studying meditation with the venerable... Oh, Ray, I'm going to have you do this. I didn't practice how to pronounce these names.
Oh, that's quite all right, because I cannot really pronounce his name from memory either. We lovingly called him Bhante. So Bhante is quite all right.
All right. We'll put the official pronunciation, the official spelling in the description. So you began with Bhante in the late 1970s and then spent 25 years learning and studying with Roy Eugene Davis. And Ray is a minister in the Kriya Yoga tradition. And personally, Ray, I want to just thank you for being my Sanskrit tutor. I really appreciated your patient style of teaching and focus on the basics. So today we're going to talk about Sanskrit as part of a spiritual practice. But before that, I'd love to just get some background for the audience so they know, maybe tell us about Bhante and what was going on in your life that made you seek meditation, and how did that unfold and lead you to Kriya?
Oh, okay. I'll see if I can hold this to 3 hours or less. In the mid-70s, as a young man, I was becoming curious. Something was awakening. I think we've, at various times, all kind of felt a little something questioning. So a friend of mine had a book by a fellow named Paramahansa Yogananda called Autobiography of a Yogi. So I said, what's this? And I read that and said, this is an interesting fellow who had some interesting experiences in his life. About the same time, I was also very intellectually curious. So I read another book called A New Model of the Universe. And that was by a gentleman by the name of P.D. Ouspensky. It was a very heady, I would say, book, very intellectually based. He was a follower of a Russian mystic by the name of G.I. Gurdjieff. So I read those two books and it said, okay, kind of good. Fast forward to 1977. And there was a group in Anchorage, Alaska, where I was living at the time, that was studying the writings of this G.I. Gurdjieff that I just mentioned. So I went to one of their meetings and then began attending regularly. George Cornelius, who was the head of this group, was a good friend of Bhante. And Bhante would come through once every few months through Anchorage. And Bhante and I became friends. And Bhante very lovingly took me under his wing and taught me a particular medication. I guess in a way it was for the soul. A meditation having to do with color, having to do particularly with the color green, which is the color associated with anahata, the heart chakra. I found that very soothing. I don't even know what it did for me. It did something. It put me in touch with something that I knew that was there, but didn't quite grasp. So I began meditating a bit. Then went and spent a year in England, following the teachings of this Russian mystic Gurdjieff guy. They had a program that lasted for a year. So I spent 1978 in England. But while there, this program fell apart. So things got interesting. Here I'm in England with my son, single parent things, and this program just kind of begins to disintegrate. But it began to disintegrate in an interesting way. It began to disintegrate because of the intervention of a yogi who simply went by the name of Dadaji. He sent writings over to this program saying, what you're doing here is all wrong. You need yoga sadhana. I was able to get hold of some of his correspondence to the administrators of this program. My partner who was with me did some administrative work, and I read this, and the yoga began to speak to me. Now, here's what really, you'll like this, Joan. Here's where it gets really interesting. I come back over, and I'm entering the householder portion of my life now, into the 30s. I go into college, and I'm hired by IBM, and I'm off to my tech career and all that kind of stuff. Well, I had 2 boxes of books sent over from England when I returned. One box never made it. It's at the bottom of the ocean somewhere. One box did make it. So I unloaded that box and put it in the bookshelf there in my study space. One evening coming in from work, I was drawn to say, just go over and just choose a book. This job thing is beginning to own you. You're unsettled. Something's missing here. I went over and just stood there and put my hand out and kind of went like this and grabbed a book and pulled it out. It was called Studies in Truth by Roy Eugene Davis. And it was in the box that didn't go to the bottom of the ocean. I read the first lecture, and that was it. Every night for the next 2 or 3 weeks, when I got off from work, the first thing I did was to go in and read that. And that led me then to place a phone call. There's a phone number in the back of the book. And I called CSA and said, hey, I'd like to come and hang around for a while and meet this Roy Eugene Davis guy. This is in 1994. They said, yes, you're welcome here. I said, okay, I'll see you in a year. And I want to give myself a year to prepare, to have time to begin again a meditation practice, to begin again my hatha yoga practice that had fallen to the wayside because of the busyness of my job, all that kind of a thing. And so I cleaned up the diet, began practicing hatha yoga, and began as best I could for my loving friend Bhante meditating again. And then went down in 1995 and was initiated by Roy on July the 6th of 1995. But all this came about because the right box of books didn't get lost in the ocean. So
that is an amazing story. And you filled in some details I hadn't heard before. So you were seeking some answers, or you said you were curious, and then Bhante was more of a Buddhist tradition, correct?
Yes, he was a Buddhist monk. Yes.
And then along the way, studying this Russian kind of intellectual path. And then, do you even remember buying the Roy's book, or how did it get in that box?
I have no idea.
Maybe it came from that center that you were affiliated with, or something.
Well, that's the odd thing. The place I went to there in England, just as Roy, when he was there at CSA, had his printing business, etc. They did too there in England. It was called, I believe, Coombe Springs Press, something like this. And they mainly published, to my memory, at that time, Gurdjieff's works and some works by Idris Shah and others like him in the Sufi tradition, which I really, really like and still read every now and then, things in that Sufi tradition. I have no idea or no memory of ever seeing anything by a Roy Eugene Davis, anything like that. So I was quite surprised when I reached in that bookshelf and pulled out that book. And I literally out loud said, who is this guy?
I love the power of books and the power of the written word. And our guru, Roy Eugene Davis, was very committed to that, to his writing. And of course, Yogananda's book has affected so many people. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so then you went, and we'll hear more about that along the way, I think. But I also love that as part of what you shared that there was a click, really. There was a feel like you'd studied all these things and they were great. But when you read Roy's book, even the first day, you knew this was it. This was the solution, or this was the system that you were looking for.
Yeah, probably the best way for me to phrase it is really quite simple. I knew I was home, and it was a very deep settling within me, and it felt good to go home.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, and I'm hoping we'll hear more stories about your experiences with Roy, but along the way, at
Mhm.
some point you got interested in Sanskrit and started studying. And so what called you in that direction?
That came about when I finally escaped the technology zoo, as I call it, the IT zoo, and prior to just 2 or 3 years prior to my retirement, I was looking for something to do after retirement. Not only was I looking for something to do after retirement, I was being asked every time I saw Roy, 2 or 3 times a year. I knew the question was coming, and darn it, Joan, I would try to be prepared. But he had a way of kind of getting it in there to where it would kind of catch me off a little bit. And we'd be sitting and talking, and then all of a sudden it's like, what are your plans? I knew the question was coming. And so I told him, okay, I was going to do this. And he would just kind of give me that look. And I knew in that moment that, nope, you ain't going to do that. So I went to the Ayurvedic Institute 2 or 3 years prior to retirement for panchakarma, for a cleansing, and to see if that was something I'd be interested in. Uh, to put it short, just very briefly, yes. I went there, met Dr. Ladd, and said, yes, okay, this is it. And planned to go in 2008. I knew that from reading Dr. Ladd's books leading up to this, that Sanskrit was woven in to Ayurveda. I had known from talking to Roy, and even though he didn't use very direct Sanskrit terms of the Devanagari script or anything like that, but I also knew that it was woven in with the Kriya Yoga teaching also. And I began to see this commonality. So I decided to call Vyaas Houston at the American Sanskrit Institute, and I ordered his Sanskrit by CD correspondence course and began studying that. And then called him back and said, "Hey, I'm kind of going along in this, but I'd love to go to this seminar that you're giving in New Jersey, this intensive. Do you think I'm far enough along?" He just said, "Oh yeah, come along, come on over." So I'm on a jet and I'm over to New Jersey uh, to get the Sanskrit thing happening to prepare me for for my Ayurvedic teachings. You'll find this interesting, Joan. When I was there, we were taking a break, standing out in the driveway, and Vyaas, myself, and Pierre, whom you mentioned before, we were standing there talking, and Vyaas asked if I would want to come, I think, in another month or two for another intensive. And I said, well, usually I go down to see Roy at CSA. And he says, oh, his eyes lit up. And he says, is this Roy Eugene Davis? And I said, yeah. He says, oh, I love it there. I love him. Come to find out that Vyaas had been to CSA. So it just, these interconnections just kept happening there. So we had a good conversation talking about Vyaas. He said, be sure next time you see Roy to give my greetings. So when I next saw Roy, I said, hey, Vyaas Houston says, he's, oh, yes, I know. Roy knew some folks. So I began studying Sanskrit in prep for the Ayurvedic Institute.
And so maybe we'll talk about Ayurveda more the next time you come back on the podcast. But
Yeah.
I love that as well. And I think Dr. Ladd went to CSA as well. Yeah.
Oh, no, they were good friends. I know while I was at the Institute, Roy and I, of course, during my 2 years there, Roy and I stayed in touch. And I did manage to go over to CSA a couple of times during those couple of years. And Roy would always ask me, please give my greetings to Dr. Ladd. And so I'd get back and say, hey, Roy says hello. And says, oh, yes, please tell him I said hello. And I'm thinking, I'm kind of the middleman here between these guys. But No, Dr. Ladd and Roy were good friends. Actually, Roy was a keynote speaker at one of the Ayurvedic conferences there. And he and Dr. Ladd had their tables or whatever it was set up next to each other. Good friends.
Well, thanks for all the insider stories, and I think it's kind of an honor to be the messenger boy between
Yeah.
great leaders and great teachers. So, well, so it sounds like you got into Sanskrit because you were seeing these words in yoga, you were seeing these words in Ayurveda, and you're like, okay, oh, I want to know the deeper meaning and be able to study that way. So, what lit your fire about Sanskrit? Like, because you're still studying it and teaching it. So what about it do you love so much?
Well, Sanskrit with me is what we call a slow burn. It's one of those things, just as Kriya Yoga is, uh, an ongoing process of learning and unfolding and becoming. And it just has a way of rearranging your neurological patterns, let's say. Learning Sanskrit, one has to discard a lot of preconceptions that one has about language, especially with those of us here in the West. Uh, in the West, things have gotten over the years more and more away from fully integrating the human vocal apparatus into our speech. We become lazy-minded and lazy-tongued in some ways. Okay. Sanskrit keeps keeps you honest. I would say for me, like I say, I'm not a scholar, I'm not an expert. I'm more your gateway type of a person to this. Uh, I love introducing people to Sanskrit, introducing them to the basics. If they really wish to dive, deep into it, then I would suggest then, a Vyaas Houston, a Nicolai Bachman of Sanskrit sounds, et cetera, et cetera. But if you wish to know the basics and how this stuff moves in this vocal apparatus, I might be a good guy for you. But just the way that it vibrates, it literally pulses and vibrates with life. And it's what we call spanda. Spanda can be translated a few different ways from the Sanskrit. It can mean the pulse of life. It can mean the rhythm or whatever. But the language itself has this rhythm that's naturally built in. It's very organic. It's such a natural fit for anyone who just lets go of all your preconceptions. You let go of all that stuff, and it just settles in very naturally. I sound like a fanboy, but that's only because I am.
What I'm hearing and what I experienced from you when I took some lessons with you is that it has to do with the feel of it. Like you enjoy the sound of it and you enjoy the rhythm of it. And we should maybe share that you're a musician. So you're
Mm.
someone that's not only attuned to sound, but, somewhat skilled with sound as well. And then also, you said it requires a discipline of, I don't know if you use these exact words, of
Yeah.
breath and mouth and tongue.
Yes, it does. And, hand in hand with that, as I mentioned, it takes a rearranging of one's idea of what language, of what learning a language really is about. When one learns even the basics of Sanskrit, and one of the most moving things I read was a piece that Vyaas Houston of the Sanskrit Institute wrote lovingly about his teacher, whom Roy also knew, surprisingly, who was, of course, an international Sanskrit scholar. And Vyaas said that even during this gentleman's later years in life, when you're talking about someone who's, the world's foremost Sanskrit scholar, one of the most enjoyable things for him was sitting with a group of students and simply chanting the Sanskrit alphabet. Even though this gentleman was a scholar in Sanskrit, that was something that he loved to do, and in Vyaas's words, derived such joy from, even at a later period. And that has to do with the natural organic vibration of the language. Each mouth position vibrates a different area of the brain, and but does it in a way that is beneficial. You know, there's lots of techniques, as we know here in the West. You can go onto the interwebs and find all kinds of vibratory stuff. I challenge anyone to go in and just type in the words vibrational healing and see what you get. You'll get pages and pages and pages of stuff. So how does one sort through all of this? I would suggest start with the root. Sanskrit has been around for thousands of years, thousands of years. Some say it was downloaded, let's use a technological term, by the ancient sages, that it was a spiritual event and was expressed vocally, of course, for many years. And then a gentleman named Panini then wrote down grammatical rules, 4,096 sutras of grammatical rules. This was about 500 BCE or so that Panini did this. And the language hasn't changed much since then. But it is still very much a vocal language as opposed to written.
You said 5,000 grammar rules?
4,096.
Oh, well, still close, right?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. What's the difference, right?
Well,
what you could pass a couple of hundred, who knows?
You piqued my curiosity when you said that it kind of rewires your brain, or it takes a letting go of everything you thought you knew about learning language, because normally when we learn a language, we go practice it with other people who speak that language, or we go travel to that country to practice the language. And so could you talk about first what you meant by how does it require that shift, but also how do you practice it when you can't go have a casual conversation or over coffee?
Yeah, there's a variety of ways. I mean, I'm not a Sanskrit conversationalist, let's say. You know, I focus mainly on the Yoga Sutras, the Ayurvedic approach, things like that. And in day-to-day conversation, you're right. No, I'm not going to go downtown Main Street and start speaking Sanskrit with anyone. It's not going to happen. A variety of things that one can do there. Like I say, there are some online resources that are available. Like Nicolai has what he calls Sanskrit Sounds, which is a website that's very good. Nicolai, of course, went to CSA. Roy had brought Nicolai in at one time, and so he is a trusted source. And even just sitting, of course, anything with Vyaas Houston of the American Sanskrit Institute, of course, is very valid. And one can sit with the materials that they have recorded and available. These would be Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It'll be devotional chants. It'll be the alphabet. Listening to them and then going through it, yourself. As a regular, I'll give you a personal and real life example. Each evening prior to beginning my evening quiet time, I do just some breathing and sitting in the evenings to transition from the day into the evening. It always begins with chanting the Sanskrit alphabet, not with any devotional chanting, anything. I simply chant the alphabet. And when I finish chanting the alphabet, that in itself brings in a vibratory, energetic that is centering, uplifting at the same time. So to more directly answer your question, gather materials from trusted sources such as Vyaas and Nicolai and others. Listen to their recordings. You can get writings, of course. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are available in the Sanskrit and transliterated, and others, and some devotional chants, and just practice them along with these people who are who are the masters at this. and just sit and enjoy it. You know, go ahead. Don't treat yourself as if, okay, I gotta do this because this is what I'm supposed to. Nah, let go of all that stuff. There is, as Vyaas would so eloquently state at the beginning of any of his lessons, there's no right or wrong here, no good or bad. Do it. Open your mouth and experience it. Let go of judgment. Let go of any, criticism, anything like. Do it, enjoy it, feel it.
And I remember you sharing that with me before, that you chant as a prelude to your quiet time or meditation. And I think the alphabet is so beautiful when you taught it to me. And so what I'm hearing is it rewires your brain, and it changes your perspective just by doing it and hearing it. It's just the sounds themselves and the act of creating the sounds. And so would you share the alphabet with us?
I'll go ahead and do a shorter version of what I usually chant. Usually I chant it each line twice. In this case, I will chant each line once, let folks hear the alphabet straight through. Om. I, E, U, U. A, I, O, Au, R, Ri, Ler, Ka, Ka, Gag, Ka, Nya, Cha, Cha, Ja, Ja, Nya, Ta, Ta, Da, Da, Na, Ta, Ta, Da, Da, Na, Ba, Pa, Ba, Ba, Ma, Yara, Lava, Sha, Sha, Sa, Ha. Now it is said by some written scholars that because, and I would have to go along with this, there's something called pranava in Sanskrit. Pranava is that designation, that representation, that signifying energetic of a word. And the word om, which is a combination of and u, signifies creation, as stated in, for instance, the Bible, in John. In the beginning was the Word. That word being om. And it is said that in the Sanskrit alphabet, if one chants all of the letters in the Sanskrit alphabet, that one is bringing in all the energetic representations and vibrations in this creation. Is that true? I don't know. I will simply say what Roy has said to me before, which is, don't believe a word I tell you. Try it yourself, and see. See what chanting this alphabet does for you. But I think you'll find something there. And when one chants the alphabet, of course, it prepares you then to pronounce words in their proper manner. We here in the West, oh my, we are guilty sometimes of taking these vibratory sounds, these subtle sounds, and kind of smoothing them out.
Well, I want to just comment on the alphabet. When I was working with you and practicing the alphabet regularly, I did find it calming. And I do think that biomechanically, now I'm not a mouth expert, but I would guess that biomechanically your tongue, mouth, and vocal cords have to do a wide variety of things to create those sounds. And so it, to me, parallels that it probably does represent all the things in creation. But let's talk about some of those words that we use a lot as yoga teachers or yoga practitioners, and how they're really supposed to be pronounced.
The two of the most common mistakes are, here in the West, we usually tend to put our accents on the next to the last syllable of a word. That's just naturally how we think it naturally goes. Not so in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, there's a rhythm. There's a mantra there's each syllable has a particular number of beats. It can be one, beat which is short, or 2 beats or longer. For instance, let's take a word that we use quite commonly, pronounced Kriya, Kriya Yoga. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news for all my yogi friends there. It's Kriya. Kriya. It's the long A at the beginning of Kriya, for instance, Kriya Yoga. But like I say, we tend to go Kriya. Also, when we all want to align our chakras, it is chakra. Chakra.
I'm a little embarrassed, Ray, because I literally, before this podcast, recorded a guided meditation and I had forgotten what you taught me. I said chakra. Say it again.
Chakra.
Chakra.
It's a palatal. It's the second mouth position, palatal position. Cha. And they're all short sounds.
Chakra.
Chakra. But, in the West, and I've seen so many recordings of yoga teachers and things, it just seems a little more, if you're in your class and stuff, it seems a little more, chakra, and all. But no, it's chakra. And even, let's say, with a word, ananda, for instance, there's a tendency to put the accent on the second, the next to the last or the second. So ananda, it's actually ananda. Ananda. So instead of Paramahansa Yogananda, it's Paramahansa Yogananda.
I wonder if he got, I actually was just rereading Autobiography of a Yogi this month. And I think he says in there that people said his name many different ways. I think he said
I'm sure they did.
On the boat on the way over to Boston the very first time, he said he got experience with people mispronouncing his name that would carry on for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other words that we use frequently in the yoga community that okay. we could correct?
Well, when we speak of the yamas and niyamas, for instance, the very first of the yamas, they're the personal disciplines. We've heard it pronounced, the do no harm. That's however one wants to define it. We've heard it many times as ahimsa. It's actually ahimsa. There's the long A, which gives you a little longer duration, and it follows that accent, that naturally. It's ahimsa. So when one is teaching the yamas and niyamas, it's ahimsa. Also, we speak of the kleshas. Okay, and the very first one, we pronounce it. A lot of folks will pronounce it avidya. It's actually avidya. Avidya. Once again, the long A at the end. And one of the beautiful sutras that Patanjali states there. I mean, this is one of my. Can I sneak in one of Ray's faves here? Okay. One of Ray's faves is avidya kshetram uttaresham. Prasupitanu vitarodharanam. The very first part of that is really what gets it for me. Avidya kshetram uttaresham. He's speaking after he lists in the prior sutra, he lists singularly all of the kleshas. And then he states, avidya kshetram uttaresham. Avidya is the field for all the others. Every time I hear that, it brings it all back home.
I love that sutra too, and it's Roy focused a lot on the first klesha, right? The ignorance, because if you know what you are, then that's if you don't know what you are, that's the source of all the other problems, right? So it's the field. It's like where the other ones are growing up from. And so what I'm taking away from what you just said is that there's a benefit in the sounds themselves, even if you don't know what they mean, even if it's just, there's a benefit in hearing them and saying them. But there's also what attracted me to Sanskrit is, wanting to really understand the meaning of the sutras. And when I read people's translations, those words can be translated and then interpreted so many ways. So it's nice to be able to look back at the actual Sanskrit. And
Yes,
even each
yes.
word, I still might not know there might how to choose which of the 6 meanings it has or the 10 meanings it has. But I wanted to be able to have just get a little closer to the source of the teaching.
Yeah, the interestingly enough there, um, Roy and I had, when we would sit in the chalet sometimes and just be chatting about stuff. And one of the things that we would chat about every now and then was just what you're speaking of. Every now and then he would just throw something out at me and says, "What does that mean?" He thought a Sanskrit word. And most of the time I knew. There were one or two that I didn't get, but then went and got back to him a little bit later and let him know. But he would use Vyaas Houston published a Yoga Sutras workbook, and it is a literal word by word translation of the sutras. I know Roy and I found benefit in that in terms of getting the literal translation of each word, not so much the commentary, but just the literal translation. Because, like I say, as you just mentioned, one word can have multiple meanings. So it's all a matter of context, the context in which it's being used.
And for me,
There.
when I go to those literal meanings, sometimes it paints a picture in my mind.
Yes.
I don't know where this is not from the sutras, but there's another word in Sanskrit. Let's see if I say it, kumbhaka.
Mm.
Kumbhaka. It's like
Oh, having to do with breathing?
yeah, but it also means an earthen pot. It's a
Oh, yeah, yeah,
pranayama
okay.
term, but for me, when I learned that it meant like a pot that holds water or energy, it helped me think about, well, my body needs to be
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
pot, that's steady and fired and ready to hold the energy. And so, anyway, things like that, I love knowing. Sometimes the literal translation of the word helps me understand the metaphysical meaning of it.
Yeah, because a lot of the time there's a connection, and I think that's where it's really useful for us as Kriya Yogas. We can sometimes see that connection, not so much, maybe not even in a literal sense, but we feel it sometimes too. You can, like as you say, you can read that literal meaning, but in the context that we are blessed to have sometimes of seeing and understanding some of these wonderful writings, there'll be a subtle energetic that we'll attune to, and that itself is very useful.
I wanted to go and talk a little bit about the retreat that you're leading at
Oh yeah,
CSA
right.
in May. And so tell us what it's going to be like.
So it's going to be an introduction to Sanskrit. We're going to begin, of course, by learning the alphabet and focusing on just the proper pronunciation of the alphabet itself. We're going to then take the alphabet and we're going to get into this beautiful thing called Sandhi, and that is blending. It's going to show how there's this blending of these sounds of the alphabet and how this blending brings about particular sounds and energetics. There'll be some common words that we've all used that we didn't realize were a blending of two different sounds. It'll also aid people who are more familiar with Sanskrit, and when they read a sutra, and you'll see like a really long word, right? But if you can identify what's probably a blending, then you can separate the words and do as you had mentioned earlier. You can then go and get that definition of that literal definition, extract that out of that long line, and it helps one get more into it. So we're going to learn the alphabet. We're going to learn this beautiful blending. We're going to do some chanting of the sutras. We're going to also learn a variety of other chants. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the more commonly heard sutras of Patanjali. Some of the ones that we've heard, and we're going to review the pronunciation and the meaning of some of the literal meaning of some of those words. there we've heard the second, for instance, the second sutra in Pada 1, Yogashthavriti Narodha. We're going to take that apart. We'll start taking that apart and saying, okay, here's what each word, and guess what? It isn't yoga chitta, it's yogash chitta, because of that beautiful blending. And we're going to work with beginning to feel and understand this human vocal apparatus, and then see how it works with Sanskrit. Like it'll be what I call a 30,000 foot level, because I want everyone to be able to join in and to enjoy. We're going to keep it to just the transliterated primarily. I'm not going to introduce a whole lot of Devanagari script. We won't have time for that. I will show it for those who feel they may want to go ahead and tackle it later, but we won't be taking questions on that in the seminar. That would be a 2-week to 3-week or 4, But I want folks to come in, get introduced to this, feel it, enjoy it, and leave with a better understanding and a heightened enjoyment and respect of this beautiful, beautiful language.
That sounds fantastic. And I just want to give one more endorsement for you as a teacher, for anyone who's listening, that I think you have a good blend of methodical, practical, step-by-step approach and some improv. Because you're a jazz musician, so you do both, right? You got the structure, but you also improv. So I bet they'll also get to hear some stories, some Ray stories, I hope.
Oh yeah, I'll throw in a couple of Roy stories there. Yeah,
Roy and Ray
no,
stories. Well, and
yeah.
I just said to my husband earlier today that I want to go to every retreat at CSA this year.
Mm.
Like there's a great lineup. So I hope, what's the dates of your retreat? If anyone's listening needs to know.
Yeah, we kick in. It's the week that ends on the 9th.
Okay. So
And
first week of May. Okay.
first week of May, yes, the
We can
first
look
week of
up the
May. I'll be
dates.
traveling down a couple of days sooner to adjust the time zones,
Yeah.
because I'll either be
Yeah.
coming from Alaska or Washington. But I
Yeah.
believe the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, or 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th is
Yeah.
when we're going to be doing it.
Great. Yeah. Well, before we do our closing, Ray, is there anything else that you want to share? It could be about Sanskrit and the retreat or anything else that you want to leave our audience with before we close officially.
I would say I would leave them with this. Like I say, you've heard me throughout this speak of my enjoyment and my respect of Sanskrit, the vibration that it can bring about. We're dealing with organic sound and things. But what I would like to leave folks with is that even let that fall away and allow this very pure, beautiful vibratory force, vibration, to sit and become the stillness. If I may, I'll introduce if I can just quote a very quick Sanskrit sutra to that. Satsangatve nisangatvam, nisangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nishchalitatvam, nishchalitatve jivam mukti. In the company of truth, one reaches a point beyond truth. In that point beyond truth, one reaches a point beyond illusion. In that point beyond illusion, one reaches a point of stillness. Beyond that state of stillness, living liberation. Enjoy the vibration, enjoy the sound, but also let it fall away. And don't forget to sit in the stillness and the silence. Everything else frames or paints that. Okay, what I'd like to do is chant a chant that I came across that connected with me because I had been, well, it came about very naturally. One of the first things that Roy taught me, both in his reading and mentioned to me every now and then, was each morning when you begin, always wish well for others before you wish well for yourself. And I've tried to do that each and every morning when arising. And so I begin each morning with this chant. And it's a good one for us to close this wonderful session. Thank you, Joan, with. So I will chant it and then tell you the meaning. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah. Sarve Santu Nirammayah. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Ma Kashchit Dukha Bhavet. May all beings be happy. May all beings be well. May all beings be blessed. That is how it should be for all.
Thank you for tuning in to the Spirit-Led Podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Monty Craig. Please subscribe to catch upcoming episodes. For support in your awakening journey, visit our sponsor, the Center for Spiritual Awareness at csa-davis.org. We offer online group meditations, classes, and in-person retreats at our headquarters in Lakemont, Georgia. Once again, that's csa-davis.org. Until next time, remember your pure essence of being, an eternal relationship with the infinite.